As I invade day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, as I make videos talking about every little thing that grabs my attention, as I ask myself the questions only I truly care about, I have gained perspective, insight, and justification for many, if not all, of the ways I enjoy this mechanic. Invading exists across every true Souls game, but in painfully few imitators. Its functions are not well understood by the casual community, and it is a source of immense friction for those who fall victim to its pitfalls. Since Demon Souls, invading has gone from a veteran practice that let those who understood how to play hunt and kill those who did not, to where it is in Elden Ring today as a test of patience, tactics, and will on the part of the invader as the host is given more and more leeway. With that development, invasions have shifted in the eyes of the community. For some, the mission remains the same: be the reason they play offline. For others, the mission has lost all meaning. But interestingly, after all these years, it feels like invasions still don't resonate with the invaded. I've played these games since 2011, and I have never experienced a time when invasions were not treated by hosts as something wholly detrimental to them and of value only to the invader. Discourse around the mechanic is one of derision and dismissal, demanding its removal or that it be made otherwise irrelevant. All of which nests in my brain like a parasite, leeching away my sanity and leading me further into the dark. But I am not dissuaded from the mission. My goal remains clear, while somewhat evolved. I want to help everyone understand and embrace invasions, both as a concept and as a mechanic. It's a cause worth fighting for, and I will undoubtedly die trying. So today I would like to pose the question: who are invasions for? On the surface, it might feel strange to ask. Invaders, obviously. They're the ones doing it, after all. There's no question that without invaders, the mechanic ceases, so it's only natural to say they are its primary benefactor. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't satisfaction to be had in hunting your fellow man for sport. But then when we think about how different invasions are in Elden Ring, how hosts have every possible advantage, and all but the most experienced invaders become frequent fodder, and suddenly it seems like invasions serve to harmlessly entertain and refill flasks, like the drink-serving jesters of yore. And like any jester, they will wear out their welcome and be swiftly executed. Add to that the removal of solo host invasions, the lowered player limit, and the absence of covenants, and it can be hard to think of invasions as benefiting anyone. If hosts are annoyed by them, and invaders are deliberately underserved, who is this mechanic actually made for? Well, despite the Elden Ring of it all, the foundation remains unchanged, as do its goals. To give hosts the opportunity to fight a unique and random enemy, and to give invaders a chance to act on behalf of themselves and the game. It's a simple premise to grasp, and I find it is only in execution that the purpose becomes so muddled. Managing expectations is a difficult task for any game, especially when the game is trying to deliberately tempt and trick the player. FromSoft is a standout among developers for avoiding many of the more obvious handholds. You won't find yellow paint or an auto-pathed quest menu. Important characters can frequently be killed or disrespected, locking you out of their unique offerings. These games take care to let you discover things for yourself, gently nudging you in this or that direction to help you along the way. Elden Ring sort of shits on some of those aspects with its NPC markers and protected zones, but in a game of that size, scope, and popularity, I understand why they painted with a broader brush. Anyway, invasions are a natural extension of this design philosophy. They reinforce a lesson that is constantly demonstrated throughout any given playthrough. Expect the unexpected. Around any corner could be an enemy waiting to pounce. That item that's just sitting there, begging to be grabbed, is actually just a piece of dung luring you into a trap. Enemies move and fight in erratic fashion, making them difficult if not impossible to predict on first encounter. You are supposed to experience trial and error time and again before you conquer these obstacles. Granted, not all of them are equivalent, and many can be easily duped by way of overwhelming force or excessive caution. Even the most intimidating boss encounters can be cheesed with a little googling and some mechanical exploitation. But something that remains an uncertainty, even in the most controlled environments, is invasions. There is no substitute for another player's actions. Nothing the game can do will match the variables an actual player brings to the equation. NPC invaders, while important for lore and understanding the concept, are easy to trick. They have their set list of behaviors and can be predictably punished. A player invader, however, is a much more formidable foe. You can't tell how they'll approach a fight or how they'll adjust as it progresses. Some are worse than others, but even the most foolish can surprise you. And that level of variability is exactly what the developer wants imparted to the game. I see players complain all the time that invaders break immersion or have no place in their world, as if invaders were exclusively hackers violating the terms of service at their expense. Those types of invaders do exist, of course, but they exist as hosts just as often. It's an entirely different subset of players and is in no way representative of the invasion mechanic. But that confusion is core to the misinterpretation of invasions by hosts. When Elden Ring gives you an NPC invader, it's at a set location. If you fail to kill them, you can try again. It's not any different from any other planned encounter. It's masked to feel different, but it is fundamentally the same. Any player experiencing invasions through this lens might be put off by a real invasion, where the timing and location are out of their control and second chances are seldom. Piling on, while some NPCs might be more dangerous than others, the expectation of a win is a lot less appropriate against an actual player. Dark Souls 2 added a mechanic in Scholar of the First Sin that had an NPC repeatedly invade the player at random intervals and locations. The Forlorn would show up with either a scythe or sword, and you'd have to deal with them like any invader. There were only so many eligible locations that they could appear, but many of them were not guaranteed. If they killed you, you may not get a second chance. That's a more accommodating experience when we think about onboarding players and setting expectations. Invasions can happen when you least expect it, so you need to be ready at all times. There's no way to plan for a specific invader because they're all different, so you need to be ready for anything. Obviously, there are plenty of pre-existing conditions that need to be met to be invaded in Elden Ring, so that surprise is a lot less surprising, but the fact remains that it's still random. It still necessitates that hosts and their cooperators be prepared for an invader. And once a player accepts that they need to be prepared for invasions, they can start to embrace them. And that's where the fun comes in. If you're actively part of this community, I'm sure you've seen discourse over the years about PvP and PvE builds, and how invaders have PvP builds and are fighting PvE players. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that's a bunch of host nonsense and should be disregarded. The game is functionally never exclusively PvE or PvP. There are NPCs that share the player model and fight like players, and they are interwoven into every part of the game. The same tools that work on them work on actual players, so there's really no reason to suggest you need a completely different loadout to interact. Now, I do understand optimization, and that there are many builds that are specifically geared for PvP and may not do as well against some of the larger or weirder enemies. But let me tell you, as someone who invades with every single character I make, pretty much any build can do both. That's something Elden Ring in particular excels at. Sure, some big weapons are going to hit harder and be better for larger foes with bigger hitboxes, but there are plenty of ways to use them in PvP just as effectively. And the reverse is true as well. Parry riposte builds work on tons of enemies, and even when it's not an option, fast weapons and good reactions are a tried and true strategy. What the debate really boils down to is that some players are prepared for PvP and others aren't, and that it's not fair that they interact competitively. To which I would say, sure, it's not fair. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to teach you that you need to prepare for PvP, and by not doing so, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. If you go through the entire game carried by friends or crutching on spirit ashes and spam, then get mad when those same thoughtless tactics don't work against every single invader, that's the game's way of telling you to rethink your strategy. Spirit ashes are a great utility, but the game doesn't let you use them all the time. It's indicating to you that you need to have a backup plan when you can't rely on them. The same is true of spam, be it L2 or spell. Having a magic laser gun or flying explosion sword is top-notch anime power fantasy, but against a thinking opponent, you might have to get a little more creative. Of course, if you get a couple friends to do it with you, the odds dramatically improve in your favor, but that's more a numbers advantage and a balance shortcoming of Elden Ring especially. And cooperators, while the main way to make yourself eligible for invasion, cannot always be counted on. Your friends might be terrible at the game and get you into more trouble than you can manage. Even if they're able to carry you through every encounter, the game wants you to learn to fend for yourself whenever those summons aren't available. There's a good reason you can't cooperate through literally the entire game, that Everjails are locked from multiplayer. The game wants you to understand that you can't rely on others all the time. It's not always imparting the lesson well, but it wants you to learn anyway. Invasions are the stopgap that fills in many of the cracks in that design. Whenever you think you have it figured out by just getting a few friends to trivialize the difficulty, invaders can tilt the odds back toward something resembling balance. It's not perfect, not by a fucking mile, but it serves a purpose and stands to teach you valuable skills. But not every player wants to learn those lessons. They might feel cheated when killed by something they don't understand or don't appreciate. And insisting a game has cheated you is an understandable reaction. Things are frequently bullshit in games, and they can get the fuck out with whatever they're putting down. I feel that way all the time, but what's important is to learn from that feeling and not indulge it. We should not aspire to our basest instincts. Instead, we should rise above them and learn to control our reactions. If being defeated teaches you to not engage in battle, then you're not really learning anything about battle other than how to avoid it. Not useless, but hardly admirable. Self-improvement is gained only when we push ourselves and get up after we fall. Souls games try to teach us this lesson time and time again. We shouldn't expect to win on our first try, nor should we demand change when we don't understand the lesson. The bosses of any Souls game are not difficult just to be difficult. They're difficult because that's what gives beating them meaning. If it was easy to do, it wouldn't matter as much. If nothing could ever beat you, you'd have no fear of loss. It's a classic example of challenge and reward, and it's what this series does best. Every challenging aspect of these games isn't just teaching you how to win, but teaching you how to lose. And I would say in no other field does that design shine more than in Invasions. They exist to give both sides a challenge and a deeper understanding of the game. They allow for unprecedented levels of player freedom, and they are interwoven into an experience that isn't afraid to shake things up. Making PvP something that can happen outside of a designated area is a bold decision that more games could stand to learn from. Having those safeguards in place and letting players avoid that variety of friction might meet popular demand, but popular demand would change everything that makes Souls games special. If you took a focus group mentality and applied it to the development of Dark Souls, you'd get something that looks a lot less like Dark Souls and a lot more like Skyrim or Zelda. Not that those are bad games by any means, but they go out of their way to accommodate their players and not ask them to step out of their comfort zone. Invasions are the best way Souls games break that formula because they have the potential to improve everyone's experience. Not liking being invaded is a natural step on the path to becoming an invader. No one likes losing, and it takes time and understanding to get to the other side. But if players dismiss the experience because they're in an echo chamber reinforcing their disdain, they'll stop the very growth the game wants to encourage. I know invasions aren't popular, but that's why I make these videos. Elden Ring hasn't done them many favors, but the essence is still there and it's worth engaging in, if for no other reason than to learn something about a game you enjoy and about yourself while you're at it. Because invasions and their benefits are for everyone on every side of the encounter, not just invaders looking to victimize hosts or gankers looking to devour invaders. And it's a mechanic that we may be unfortunately close to losing given Night Rain's exclusion, so we need more voices in the community that both value and understand what makes invasions great. So the next time you see someone complain about invasions, make sure to show them this entire video as many times as necessary, and maybe also sign them up for a martial arts tournament. Those kids need to learn respect, and suffering will be their teacher. I'd be curious to hear how you feel about the value invasions can provide to all players, so if you have some thoughts, feel free to put them in the comments. I always get at least a few from invasion haters telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'd like to tip that scale as much as possible. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you suspect I'm an AI program to spread invader propaganda, and subscribe for more of this never-ending discourse. Until next time, thank you for watching.